welcome our guests. We'll be chatting about how to integrate digital solutions into legacy systems. So please give a nice big round of applause for Ben Johnson and Kathryn Thompson. All right. Welcome to the stage. So why don't you introduce yourselves for the crowd?
Hi, everyone. I mean, for starters, you shouldn't assume people here aren't drunk.
Okay, fair.
We are in procurement, yeah.
Fair, okay.
And we've been let out, which is exciting. Good to see everyone. I'm Kathryn Thompson. I lead the procurement practice for Deloitte across EMEA. And I've worked in procurement since 1996. In Australia is where the accent is from. Lots of different digital procurement solutions across that time, and very excited to share our stories. And I'm with Ben.
Thank you. So Ben Johnson, I work for AstraZeneca. I'm the head of strategy and operational excellence. And part of that role, I get really excited about the technology solutions we can put in place that enable our business as well. I've been in procurement for 20 or so years. Again, truly excited to be here today.
Excellent. So Ben, Kathryn, tell us a little bit about this topic.
So we got given the topic.
Okay.
I mean, we had a whole bunch of stuff, but this is a topic that the people wanted to hear about, Matthias tells us. So it's about integrating digital solutions, and I suppose, not surprisingly, that'll be a lot around different best of breeds and niche type technologies with legacy or ERP type systems. There's a Slido here. I guess we're going to show them that you ask questions to. Yeah, this thing here. And ask us anything, and then we will moderate out the ones that we don't want to answer.
Yeah. Good short questions, people. Good short questions.
We'll do our best. We'll do our best from our shared experiences to answer.
Fantastic. Great. All right. So I've got a question already off the top here. So tell us, I know you just mentioned best-of-breed solution technologies. What are your top 3 priorities when selecting those best-of-breed technologies?
I don't think there are top 3. I think you have to go in with one,
okay,
and then there's lots of things underneath that. So I think the first thing that's most important is what does it actually mean for the organisation as a whole? I think one of the challenges we have in procurement is, I hate to say it, but there's loads of things out there, and it's very difficult for you to prioritise and understand what to look at. So I think connecting it back to the business, understanding what's important to the business is the most important priority, because if you can't sell it to the business, it's actually very difficult to get funding. It's very difficult to kind of move ahead with these programs. So ultimately, understanding what it means to the business, how it's going to enable the business, and then you've got a host of things under that, such as how much does it cost, what's the ROI, what are the other benefits you're going to get along the way. But if you can connect it to the business, that's for me the most important priority.
I think maybe almost as important is what you deprioritize. The day that you start to focus on a single application and the return on investments for that particular one and dive down that tunnel, you're suddenly going to find yourself alone in a tunnel, right? These sort of the best of breeds have to live on a transactional core, on a data set that gives you a foundation, a data level that you can make core data decisions from and anchor the rest of the things that you do. So you augment with best of breeds, but it has to be across that transactional data core. And so I agree totally with Ben. It has to be business as number 1 priority, but please make sure you deprioritize or don't get distracted by the niche solutions and what each one might turn out. It must live as an ecosystem, some of these best of breeds.
Yeah, I hear like a holistic outlook from both of you there, looking at it overall. Great. Well, we've got questions coming in on Slido. Keep them coming in. This one here. How do you balance a rapidly changing landscape to drive change and user adoption?
So I think user adoption starts with recognizing that actually the business might not be, or the users might not be less interested in the things you're interested in. So if you're product focused, you're trying to sell and sort of talk about the amazing features of a tool, sometimes that's not as important to actually what the business wants to see. So I think in terms of the change in adoption, you've got to tap into something innate within the business. What is it enabling within the business that enables you to support them through that change journey? I think if they understand what it's delivering as part of the overall business ambition, then procurement and obviously the investments you're making play such a bigger role. I think don't underestimate what you have to invest in terms of that change effort. Really think about the user experience. Really think about what it actually means for the business and the users at the end of it. Not the quirky technology elements that you start with. What it ultimately means for them in terms of what's going to feel different, what's it going to look like when they use it. And for me, in my experience, and certainly deployments I've made, if you don't start with that, it's very difficult to then bring it at the back end of the process and try to sell it later on.
One of the programs Ben and I are working on together now, we kind of pride ourselves on putting the thoughtless user at the heart of our experiences. So the idea is that we need to prioritize vaccines for COVID and other awesome things that AstraZeneca do. And therefore, that is awesome.
It is,
yeah. It wasn't just Ben on his
I'll
own,
clap
but
for
yeah,
that.
it wasn't just Ben by himself for avoidance of doubt. But team effort. But, we need our scientists being at the forefront of technology and focused on research and development. And therefore, with regards to procurement, successful change is them being thoughtless. Yeah, we don't want them to worry about policies and procedures and where do I go and what system do I log on for? Okay, is this a contract or do I need an RFP here? Is there a preferred? If I'm travel, am I here? And if I'm lab supplies, am I there? It's not okay, right? So the idea is to enable, I think, successful change. In this case, we put a lot of time into the thoughtless user so that they can be a scientist or work on logistics or packaging or whatever their day job is that creates real value for AstraZeneca and society. But the change happens because we're not actually making them have to think about these sorts of policies and procedures. And I think these sort of programs where we, make all videos and this and that sort of stuff, quite often the business just don't care. They need to do what it is that they want to do, and therefore we enable them to. One caveat I have to say, though, to make an environment that allows your end user to be thoughtless means someone has to do a lot of thinking. So there's a team here that say, what are the different ESG priorities? How do we make sure we're protecting the brand and making sure the right quality of goods and services there at a good price and good value as well, right? So that background work still needs to happen, but successful change is about really thinking about the end user and what they need to do to make your company successful, not what works for procurement or what's a cool training program.
Yeah. All right, we've got a question now about talent, so maybe a little bit of a pivot here. Someone asking, what's the importance of talent in building a strong end-to-end ecosystem?
I think if we start on talent as a theme, then I think we're actually at a really pivotal point, I think, in procurement, because if you think about where we've come in the last 10 or 15 years, we've now got amazing technology which leads to big data, big insights, but actually you've still got a procurement function that's focused primarily on certain skills that perhaps aren't as relevant to what you'd see in like a data scientist. So actually, when we talk about the investments we want to make in awesome technology, we've got to think about how do we bridge the gap between a procurement manager's expertise and knowledge and that of what you see in perhaps a data scientist, because a data scientist also isn't an expert in procurement. So I think one of the challenges that we have in adoption and moving forward with any awesome technologies that we're looking at is we've got to think about how are these going to be used in practice. Am I going to have to bring in a new team of people who can interpret the data and actually be able to manage these new systems? Or are we training and building capability within our existing workforce so they can use those tools and obviously get the value from them?
I think, and a challenge maybe company, because not all of us have a company as big as AstraZeneca, right? And the smaller your procurement team is, the more difficult. You probably don't have a data scientist team, depending on the size of your organization. So there's a real challenge, I think, especially for leaner teams, where there's a foundational skill set that we need to have in procurement around sort of category analysis or understanding demand and translating that and working into a supply request, coupled with these sort of peak technology demands. And a tricky thing if we go to the theme of experiment or working with best of breed and digital solutions is how do you train for this stuff, right? Especially if you do a proof of concept, you build up some skills and getting a proof of concept to work isn't just, plug in and press play. I think some of us have found before, right? There needs to be some talent around it. So how do I train for a POC that I might use for a little while? Or I have a third party doing it and then that knowledge is lost when my POC is over. And then I've got to try another and another and another. And it's suddenly, the cost of sometimes these experimentations and pilots is more than a free trial, right? It's getting the right resources there. But for smaller companies where we need to upskill or downskill or reskill over and over to get the tech to work, that's a consideration. So I think what we see in procurement in general is a core set of foundational skills we get, but a much more fungible skill set around business partnering, problem solving, customer relations, supplier relations. Business partnering is a big, big theme that comes up all the time to be able to be successful even in our digital transformations. It's become trickier for us, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of stakeholders at play, right? We got a question about suppliers. Should suppliers be included in key stakeholders, helping to make decisions on which technologies to use? How much do you include suppliers in that?
Interesting question. So I think there are certain environments where you've got very strategic suppliers, and you'd be daft not to include them in considerations around what you're looking to do with perhaps your end-to-end system. However, it may well be that the suppliers you're working with are actually part of the challenge, and you're actually looking to switch out. So there's not really, it's like turkeys voting for Christmas. They're not going to be that supportive if you're looking to make a switch. So I think it really depends on the context of what you're doing and where you're at and the maturity of what you're doing. But I think the right type of partnership and the right types of supplier relationships can add a tremendous amount of value, because you're looking for that objective challenge. You're looking for that understanding as to perhaps what else is happening out there that you don't have the resources to go and investigate. So suppliers can bring insights in from other organizations, how things are working elsewhere. But I think it is very much down to the organization and whether it's right for you, or actually whether you need to be stepping away from an existing supplier and looking at it independently.
I think also, definitely, and also, the more the communal a problem is, the more communal approach. So it had to happen sometime in this 30 minutes. Scope 3 emissions, ESG. When we're solving a problem together as a community, I think there's even more of an onus for it to get the suppliers involved. I think we were talking about this earlier. Yeah. Is it your question? You loaded it, which is good. CBRE, everyone. Yeah, also good. I've done phenomenal work, actually, with Scope 3 emissions, and have had the suppliers vote in. So you loaded it for me to advertise you? But yes, agreed. Having suppliers, as I said, where it is a communal issue like Scope 3 emissions, there's so many different ways to collect the different data into our databases, and where are we going to aggregate data that so many of us benefit from, that having their input on what's the right way to validate and get credible data is important, definitely.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, we've got so many questions coming in. Keep them coming. This one gets into some specifics, maybe. Someone asks, which typical legacy systems are hardest to integrate and why?
I don't think that's a sensible.
Okay.
Sorry. No. Let me address it rather than be dismissive. Sorry, I don't mean. But it's so the thing with number one. Let's talk. So if we take the more common ones, an SAP or an Oracle, the amount of customizations that anyone can do mean there's not one SAP or one Oracle. Yeah. So I think a lot of us probably know that. Even when we try and integrate to some of the very, very, very legacy systems, so if let's assume someone on an SAP Oracle has got some degree of standardization and there's some standard mappings, then there's some of the other smaller sort of legacy ERPs that we don't see around, and maybe they've not been updated for a while, that have very simple data sets. In every case, some clever middleware can be used to somehow integrate, and we'll just find the common threads of data where we can. I think it's just different sets of challenges, but really it's how much. If your organization has customized your ERP a lot, so whatever label is on the ERP, if you've done heavy customizations, of course you can't expect to fit in with standard integrations. That hopefully is clear. So I think as a blanket statement, we're not going to throw anyone under the bus, but if you have done heavy customizations, expect to pay the technical debt that comes with customization.
That makes sense to me, and I don't
know
anything about procurement, so that's great. Absolutely. Okay, let's keep it moving now. I've got a question about value proposition. How do you build the right value proposition to make a successful digital procurement transformation? How do you set that up?
Yeah, it's sort of related to an earlier question. I think it's quite easy for you to look inwardly into procurement and look at what you want to invest in, because you may get a productivity benefit within procurement, you may get some efficiencies that enable you as a function to be more effective. But the reality is the value proposition has to be relevant to the organization as a whole. You have to be able to articulate what it actually contributes towards the business direction or the business strategy, or an enabler for the organization. I think as you develop a value proposition, you have to think about what are you giving back to the business? What are they going to buy into? I mean, I've been in countless meetings where I've sat down with senior leaders, CFOs, CEOs, and you talk about, well, we want to invest in, I won't say the names of the technologies because, it can be quite painful at times when you're trying to articulate something you're really excited about. And it doesn't click with them in terms of what it actually means for the overall organization. So you have to connect into you're going to free up people's time. You're going to improve overall speed to market. You guys know this, right? This is the sort of language that you have to kind of sell into. But I don't think it's actually as easy for procurement professionals to be able to take sometimes the solutions that we look at and think about how do we pivot that towards something that's relevant to a business value proposition. So I guess my one word of advice on if you're talking to a procurement professional is move away from a kind of a product lens and really focus on that value proposition back to the business at a more of a holistic level. I've seen tremendous investment in programs, and I think to myself, I've seen multi-million-dollar investments into programs, and my mind is blown as to how the business has signed it off. But it's often been very simple attachment to a value proposition, and yet we'll look at a much smaller investment in procurement, and the amount of hoops you've got to go through, the amount of difficult conversations you've got to have, and you think intuitively, this is really obvious, why are we not doing this? So you've got to connect into something that's meaningful to the business, and that more often than not is not the exciting techie bit. It's just the simple thing that they no longer have to do, or they only have to click something twice rather than 50 times, or something that makes it easier for them. And then that's, for me, the value proposition. It's something simple, intuitive, and they can understand how it connects to the agenda, the broader agenda. And I think back to sustainability, I mean, that at the moment is perhaps one of the areas where it's probably an easier conversation. I'm finding it an easier conversation because you can articulate why you want to invest in something and what that will unlock to drive a sustainability agenda, because it's relevant to typically the business's agenda around sustainability as well.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think it's probably not surprising that as procurement professionals, we aren't sales professionals. And that the art of the sell to get a business case approved is something certainly a lot of the companies I work with struggle with. I think we used to have always, Deloitte, every year we do a CPO survey and we speak to them all, and a big theme often was how does procurement get a seat at the table, and how does procurement get heard, and all this sort of stuff. And I think we can be a bit guilty of being a bit introspective and think, oh, the bottom line savings are obvious, and it's straight to the bottom line, and this is so much more than any marketing campaign or a growth campaign or something. I think it's the wrong value proposition. Ben's totally right. It has to tee into the broader corporate strategy and how we deliver value and how you've got to compete with a lot of different things. The CFO's getting a new business case every day. Take away the idea that I need a seat at the table or I need the voice to be heard, and start saying, how do I empower the scientist, and how do I let the business be what it needs to be by letting the other bit feel invisible, frankly, and I'm going to let it feel invisible for you. Or whatever sales pitch works in your company.
Yeah, make it relevant to the folks who use it every day or need to make it. Absolutely. Okay, here comes another question. So this one's on balance. How do you balance end user experience versus procurement goals and ambitions? Can you bring those things in balance?
Well, unfortunately, I'm sure many people find themselves in a situation, you have a productivity target in procurement, so you don't really have a choice. If you're going to invest in something, you've got to show some sort of benefit of why you're investing for it, or it's a foundational fix, because actually, if you solve for that, it enables you to do something else. But I think the balance really comes down to, again, making sure that the business understands the broader benefit of what you're bringing to the table. But ultimately, you have to have a case for why you're going to do the change in the first place. So you have to balance it. And I've certainly not had any investment that I've made in the companies I've worked for where you've not had to kind of pivot between what does it mean for the procurement function as a whole? Are you ultimately creating productivity? Are you enabling increased value? But then again, trying to tap into that broader business story is key. I guess the challenge as well is that because there are so many different tools and opportunities out there, the question always comes back to, well, how many people is it going to free up? And we're not going to end up in a future where procurement is one person in the function and you've got 50 different systems, and so you have to kind of make sure that you're realistic as well as to whether it's worth the investment into something, because you're perhaps enabling incremental value back to the business, but ultimately it still aligns to the overall business objective as well.
Yeah, definitely. The whole headcount type based business case is. You still see some around. I think it's probably there's a maturity curve of where organisations are at in their procurement journeys, whether that case still counts or not. I think there's probably, frankly, a very tactical question of if funding is coming from a corporate level or from within a procurement budget. And then if it's a procurement-speaking procurement and it's relatively small, yes. But otherwise, it has to be a business case that would stand up against others at a CFO, CEO type level. So the balance, I think there's the conversation you might have internally and how you choose things versus an external one. I don't think many people care about the inner workings of any department. It's not just a procurement thing, right?
I think just to answer it, sorry, one more point. I work in an organisation where I compete for dollar investments into research and development, for example. As pharmaceutical companies are saving lives, Do they want to invest in something that's going to deliver a life-changing medicine? Or do they want to invest in something that's going to enable procurement to be more effective, or enable us to do something in procurement that's really cool and we're really excited about? And that's a balance. I mean, you have to have a very compelling case to be able to articulate, and again, tapping into by doing this enables us to unlock more value or more efficiency that enables us to then invest more into R&D. That's how we have to try and pitch that story together as a way in which we get the investment. Oh. My watch didn't get it.
No, he didn't get it. Oh my gosh. Okay, great. Another question now. Around.
This is like Jeopardy. It's like, what is she going to ask? We're going.
What is the capital of Tibet? No, we know. We know what that is. No, we don't. Anyway, we'll move on. Okay. Folks asking for some concrete examples, maybe from your own organizations or maybe a case you've read about recently. A concrete example of a digital solution which you recently integrated into Legacy. What were the challenges? What lessons did you learn? That's a big question.
It is a big one. I'm going to I'm going to avoid saying names of companies because when you start talking about the problems you had, I don't want to sort of put organisations in a difficult position. But I think we recently invested in a capability to measure productivity in the function. So for the most part, I think it's obvious if you have a tool that enables you to look at how effective you're running within the function, how effective you're running your contracting, how effective you're running your sourcing events, all that good stuff. What I think quickly became clear is that told us that people weren't using the existing technology properly in the first place. So I think that one of the challenges we've seen is we've gone after a tool to enable us to measure productivity. And what it's actually showed us is that the tools we already have invested in aren't being used as well as they should be in the first place. So I think that a personal experience with this is that you kind of don't really know what you don't know in some of these programs. You invest in things hoping for a particular outcome, and actually what you find is there's something else to then go fix. There's something else to then go address.
So in my illustrious role, I've seen many cases of, I didn't have to read about it, of integrating the new systems into legacy ones. The obvious one here is going to be around data, right? But I think let's take that as read. There's one around resource and expertise, particularly where if you have a legacy system and there is very limited resource, and their main job is, of course, to keep that thing running, not join your project about integrating into some whiz thing. Those two, so let's put them as 1 and 2 because they'll be most common. I think the one that catches us out maybe sometimes when we do the data map and everything looks good, we have all the resources lined up, so we've overcome the first 2 lessons learned that's on every slide deck. Process integration is a unexpected trouble sometimes. And it can be as simple as I want to take my sourcing event and turn it into a contract. And I'm going to integrate my RFP sourcing system to my new CLM system. Even if both are new and shiny, right? Forget legacy, but even so. And the thing is, integrations need triggers, and they need triggers and they need data. Now, if I'm doing a particularly complex RFP, to get very detailed, whatever the question, if I do a complex RFP, probably I don't want to just choose one awarded supplier. Probably I want to choose maybe 2 and negotiate with both and see how the terms go. And if my CLM, my fancy CLM tool that's got co-authoring and all this on it, is the place I want to do that contract negotiation, because I've bought that, how does my integration trigger work from the sourcing tool that wants one awarded supplier to get transmitted as a data set to my fancy CLM tool when I need to do redlining with 2? And example number 1, right? Straight away, straight out of the blocks, I'm running RFPs that if you did it on paper and hadn't gone these wonderful roads before, you say, of course, I choose a supplier, it integrates my CLM system, we redline it, we award it, it goes into my P2P and we buy off. That's how the demos go, right? But I think we could all ask how many times, really, I just did a straight off one supplier, I've chosen them, and away I go. So I think thinking through process integration, and what I saw in real life, if you weigh out the volume of some of these integrations and the technical debt that might be created, depending on what the systems are, for future upgrades and all this, trying to harmonize the release upgrades of all of these different systems, especially if you do a best-of-breed mega mix and have 3 or 4 or 5 different systems that are all upgrading every 3 months, and shoot, these poor people reading release notes and trying to marry all these together. Some of my clients we found not technically integrated is the better way to get a process integration. And people's face go pale when I say, you could do the sit and swivel system, because it's not meant to be what we would say, but sometimes the business case for a technical integration, particularly if we put a real life process lens on it, just isn't there. We're going to put a lot of effort in to take one data field like a supplier name or supplier number, 2 data fields, and that doesn't give us a real benefit. So we're always back to the value case. Number one priority, we said from the start, a good transactional call, but being very sensible about resource allocation, business case, process integration, how those things are going to work in real life for real humans in your business that need not to care about this but deliver the real things they need.
Great. All right. I think we've got time for 1 or 2 more questions here. This one's got a bit of jargon, so sorry if I mispronounce anything. With the rise of advanced LLMs like Gemini or GPT-4, how do you see the future of procurement legacy systems adapting as they get more information and the capability to do more? I'm taking it that's an AI system. Like I hear GPT, I'm thinking Chat GPT.
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, for sure. All right, here we go. This does feel like Jeopardy, yes.
Yeah.
For $1 million, with the rise of advanced LLMs like Gemini or GPT-4, how do you see the future of procurement legacy systems adapting as they get more information and the capability to do more?
I think, I mean, it goes without saying, everyone's asking the question, what's going to be the use cases of this technology? And there's already some emerging. So I think, if you look in the contracting space, there's an opportunity to look at more efficient ways in which you can contract. There's also a danger, I think, if we're not careful about how we look at some of these emerging technologies, because they pull data, and they're obviously from stuff that people manually put into things today, and they give you an interpretation. Now, the risk is that people stop putting data into things, and you actually end up sort of creating a virtuous circle of data, pulling data from other systems that, where the automated information becomes the output, and you end up not being clear as to whether you're getting a reliable set of information into any tools or things you need. So you need to make sure that your governance and structures around what's feeding these systems is still adequate and set up. But I actually think we're a long way off any really strong use case at this stage, because we're still just getting over the hurdles of a lot of our different best-of-breed systems and how do they connect into our existing ERP systems. So I think those excited to see something in the next 6, 12 months. I would be very surprised if something emerges other than some unique use cases. But
yeah, 100%. The transactional core we talked about, that foundational base must be there. That starts with, right? And there's not a way around that, because procurement doesn't live in its own little world. The reason we use ERP systems is so that we can connect. We need to work with finance and users and like a HR system, All of this ecosystem of resource planning is there for a reason, and that foundational bit needs to be right. And I'd suggest, as Ben said as well, that a lot of people don't have that right. With Gen AI, I think there's a few cases now where we've seen the generative outweighs the intelligence. It's coming off the fabricated data and creating some tricky use cases. Or the only bits where it's looked quite successful to me is where we've put it on quite a narrow data set. So if it's pulling on our existing approved by our legal department contracts to make a nice contract summary, happy days, right? So these sort of isolated cases are working well. We're using it to complete some scope 3 emission at the product level type data, that type of thing where we can take known data sources on scope 3 emissions and complement existing data sets on known bits of information, finite data sets that we could validate. But otherwise, there's quite a lot of hazard there, and I think we're a way off. There's a lot of hurdles to cut before we try and take hold of some of those things.
Great. Well, that's it for my questions. I just wanted to leave you with the final word. If there's anything else we didn't touch on today you wanted to mention, or anything else on your mind.
I think it's important to say that integrating digital solutions into legacy systems is a technology and data problem in probably the 3rd place. And ahead of them, we have a value case and a talent case that need to be addressed and really committed to be able to be successful in this. So looking end to end, think about what your company needs to really achieve, not just what does procurement does. Don't be silo mentality. Don't think of one application. This needs to live and breathe as an ecosystem that serves your company and your stakeholders and your customers. That's when we're successful.
And in the red clock that's ticking away, they're giving me 10 seconds left. I could echo those comments there, but definitely I think if you're selling it, help the buying community understand how to sell that back into the organization through the value. And if you're investing in these tools. For me, it's all about ensuring that as a business, from a capability perspective, you're also investing in the right talent to be able to unlock the true potential of those systems and tools as well.
Absolutely. Well, Ben, Kathryn, thank you so much for all your answers today. Big round of applause for our speakers. Yeah.